It's The Big Take from Bloomberg News and iHeartRadio. I'm Wes Kosova. Today, the UK has an online gambling problem, and now it's heading to the US. Online gambling has exploded in the UK, especially since the pandemic. Those catchy gaming apps that entice you to play for hours right on your phone, they've hooked millions of people and sometimes drained their bank accounts. No surprise that online gambling addiction is a big issue. Now the US is loosening its own online gambling laws. And with it comes concerns that the problems gamblers in the UK are experiencing will soon play out on an even larger scale in America. A little later, I talk with two of my Bloomberg colleagues who've written a deeply reported story on the pitfalls of online gambling. But first, a conversation with Stuart Kenny. He made a fortune as a founder of Paddy Power, one of the UK's largest gambling companies, before he walked away from it. He's now one of his industry's most vocal critics. Stuart Kenny, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Wes.
Stuart, I wanted to ask you why, after being so successful in building a very large company, Paddy Power, which is one of the most recognizable companies in online gambling, you chose to step away from it in 2016.
It was nearly 30 years I was on the board. I just thought I was talking to myself, that I thought that we were becoming the new cigarettes. We were getting a stench due to gambling addiction, and we were not taking the measures, that we were going down a route of trying to hunt the addict, to find the people who are addicted and trying to root them out of the system. But in fact, the product needed to change, and safeguards need to be put in place, and the board would have to accept we would make less money, but we would have a sustainable business that would go into the future. Since then, the stench from gambling addiction has become larger and larger, and I don't regret the decision, and more governments are now seeing that they have to step in. And in fact, it is a government issue. It is really expecting publicly owned companies to do their own...
sort of police themselves.
It's too much of conflict. The governments need to step up to the plate and bring in restrictions. People think of gambling as just one huge thing. I mean, coming on, having a flutter in the Grand National or having a bet on the World Cup is not that addictive. But getting onto the highly addictive online casino is highly addictive.
You had been in this industry for a long time. What changed from the time you started to the time you decided to leave that made you think you could no longer do it?
What changed was probably online and the rise of casino-type products in betting shops. The fixed odds betting terminals became a scourge of the high street.
And why is that?
In order to understand addiction in gambling, the two elements that are foremost in it are how quickly between investment and result, and how quick can you repeat the dose. So you bet on Donald Trump to win the next presidential election. It is 2 years away. Therefore, that is not an addictive product. You have to wait 2 years. Whereas you bet on the spin of a coin, and it's very quick. And the fixed odds betting terminal, the government forced them to put in a 20-second time delay between spins because it was so addictive. But even that didn't solve it. So what we're looking for in anything is to slow down the process so people have time to think, am I self-destructing? On the online casino, the whole process needs to be slowed down because the online casino is much faster than a normal casino. Now, may I say, I made huge mistakes. I should have seen it earlier. And the finger can be pointed rightly at me that I did not put my hand up earlier and say, look, these concerns are real and we need to do something about them. I campaigned against fixed odds betting terminals coming into Ireland, but I should have left the board at that point because fixed odds betting terminals had no social benefit whatsoever. It was just a highly addictive product. It was the crack cocaine of gambling. And the truth is, the online casino has become the crack cocaine of gambling.
For people who aren't familiar with gambling, can you define what fixed odd betting is and why it's so different and why you say it's such a big problem?
The fixed odds betting terminals were basically putting fixed odds onto a casino product. Fixed odds are you buy a lotto ticket, you don't know what you'll win or what. That's not fixed odds. You bet Donald Trump for the next presidential election, it's around a 4-to-1 shot. So you put on a pound and you get back £4 plus your pound backs, you get five back. That's a fixed odds. So what they did was they made a casino product into a fixed odds betting product, and it became a huge political hot potato. Bookmakers were opening up shops specifically in impoverished areas because the fixed odds betting terminals went so well.
So you can win a whole lot all at once or lose a whole lot all at once. Then if you lose, you want to do it again to maybe win. And if you win, you want to do it again to win. And so you just keep going round and round.
Round and round. And there were many things they could have brought in, such as every 5 spins, you had to cash out, take your money, start again. That would have given people time to think. The whole point of this is giving people time to think before they self-destruct.
And one of the things I suppose that's especially problematic is that it's just on our phones. It's with you all the time so that you don't actually have to be in one location. You can gamble and be enticed to gamble no matter where you are.
That's right. Some of the measures that in order to stop people self-destructing is to make gambling a little bit less accessible to everybody. You don't want to take the fun away from gambling because the vast majority of people aren't gambling addicts. You want to make the product available because that's what society wants, but you don't want to make it so available that vulnerable people get sucked in. So for the average population, it is fine to be offered a bet, but if you make it too accessible to children and to vulnerable people, it becomes a problem. It will be a huge problem in the United States.
Why do you say that? What do you see happening in the United States that makes you believe that?
It is more a free-for-all society. It is more a society that accepts some people fall through the cracks. Europe is different.
I was speaking to our reporters who were working on this story, and they said that one of the things that makes it so addictive is that the minute you stop, all of a sudden your inbox is flooded with offers for free spins, trying to get you back in, offers to lure you back into the casino. Is that something that you saw when you were in the industry still, when you were still at Paddy Power?
Yes, and I put my hands up. I should have been much more aware. Let people gamble if they want to gamble. I'm not saying restrict, but don't suck the vulnerable in. We don't allow the cigarette industry to start giving out free cigarettes on the street. We don't allow the drinks industry. We've brought restrictions in all societies because they've seen the damage. The gambling industry has a danger of becoming the new cigarettes, and that will make it harder for them to get executives.
Can you describe the day that you told your company, the company that you were co-founder of, that you were walking away?
I'd been involved in the setup of Paddy Power. I had been on the board for 28 years, and I had made a decision that there was a thing that arose in a board meeting beforehand where they had pulled some advertising to do with what they describe as responsible gambling. Now, that's a euphemism. Let's call it what it is. It is gambling addiction we're talking about. So they had been advertising very effective. Take a break. It's available on YouTube. You can get those ads. They were Australian with Sportsbet. And they had made these wonderful ads, but they were so effective that people were closing down their accounts. Well, I thought that was the whole point of the exercise. And they said that they were too effective and they were pulling them. And they muttered something about that people were opening up with other people. And I said, well, look, if that's the journey that they need to make before they become aware that they have a problem, so be it. And I was the only one who spoke up against pulling these ads. And then I knew, look, I had to speak to myself and say, clearly, I'll either be a complete hypocrite or rather than just being a minor hypocrite if I continue on, and I made my decision to go. So I prepared for the next board meeting and said I was going.
So you've made a lot of money off the gambling industry. Now that you are raising questions about it, raising awareness about it, are you using your own money to sort of fund anti-gambling addiction treatment or initiatives?
I have funded charities to do with gambling addiction. In fact, some of them refuse to take my money on the basis that the money is tainted. What they asked me to do, rather than put the money up front. Now, some of them I did, and I will continue to give money to, but they asked me to speak out.
Stuart Kenny, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Wes, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
After the break, how did online gambling come to this? I'm here with two colleagues from London. Gavin Finch is an investigative reporter for Bloomberg, and Harry Wilson is a finance reporter. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Gavin and Harry, you have written this story about what you have called Britain's gambling nightmare. For those of us who aren't familiar with what's happening in the UK and gambling, could you tell us?
Sure. So there's been a sort of explosive growth of online betting in the UK in the last decade, particularly habit-forming casino games like slot machines and roulette, sort of virtual casinos. These are extremely lucrative games for gambling companies, but not for punters, who are losing on average about £14 billion a year, I think it was, over the last 4 or 5 years. And when we say explosive, like the growth in these games, it's gone from £27 million in 2014 to more than £4 billion last year.
And so this is online gambling. This isn't going down to the corner to the little gambling shop or going to a formal casino, but this is all taking place in apps that you use on your phone or your computer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. This is something very different to your traditional idea of what gambling might take. Certainly in the UK, the long traditional view of gambling was you had a store on a high street which men emerged from smoking cigarettes, and you went inside there and it was dimly lit. It wasn't a particularly sort of pleasant place to go, but people went there, you'd have to be a sort of a committed gambler. And what's happened in, I guess, the last 10, 15 years is that's completely changed. The advent of smartphones has meant that people now have a little casino in their pocket, and anyone with an app store, with a bank account, can open up a gambling account and can begin gambling away on all these variety of casino games that have all these extraordinary names. And it's a hugely lucrative business for the gambling industry.
So when gambling moved from these little shops where you'd have to go online, was there a rush of companies moving in to capture this new audience?
I think there was a realization quite early on that online was going to be the new frontier for gambling. They were trying to sort of destigmatize gambling and make it more accessible to everybody. Critics would say that the games that they've designed are intentionally habit-forming. One of the big issues that we came across when we talked to gambling addicts and reformed gambling addicts was the extent to which these gambling companies have a hold of people. Unlike any other kind of industry I've ever come across, the VIPs in gambling are the biggest losers. So the more you lose, the more important you are to the gambling company, the more they lavish entertainment on you, free flights, tickets to sporting games, all the rest of it, because you're a valuable customer. We spoke to people where, they try and stop gambling. And after a day, a couple of days, they would be deluged with emails, phone calls, texts from their VIP manager, asking whether they're okay, whether they could provide them with some tips for new bets and giving them free spins in the casinos and things like that. And it doesn't take much for a gambling addict to succumb again to his addiction and be reeled back in.
Harry, are they keeping close track of each of the users and how long they're on and what they're winning or losing?
You can't really underestimate how much information they have on gamblers. So from people we've spoken to, certainly one of the points made to us is that pretty much from your first couple of bets, a gambling company has a very good idea of how good a client you are going to be to them over your life. And it only literally takes a few goes, a few spins, and they can pretty much predict whether you're going to be a massive loser for them, which is great, or someone who's going to be a less lucrative client. The amount of analytics that they have is incredible. So you're talking about incredibly sophisticated technology platforms here that are tracking exactly what people are doing, what they're gambling on, their gambling patterns. In a way, they know the gambler better than the gambler knows themselves. And you can see these patterns when someone stops gambling for a day or two, they'll know exactly how to lure someone back in.
Harry, one of the things you write is that there has been an increase in the number of children and teenagers who are gambling, spending, and losing a lot of money on these apps.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to the way the gambling industry has changed, right? I mean, if you think in the past, obviously, going back to our stereotypical drab gambling store, right? It would be a lot easier to spot, and with the way that gambling has gone online, that's become more difficult. And on top of that, if you look at the games, particularly these casino games, they do look very childish. The real big money spinner now for gambling companies are things that look basically like the kind of games I used to play as a kid in the 80s. The industry would obviously say that they don't aim these games at children, that they're all obviously, you have to be over 18 to use them, but you just look at them, they don't look like something that's aimed at a sort of a grown adult.
There have been some attempts to help people break their addiction to using these apps and losing a lot of money. You write about one called GamStop. What exactly is that?
So GamStop is a national self-exclusion tool which all of the UK licensed gambling companies have to sign up to. And in theory, if you sign up to GamStop and you say, I don't want to gamble for a year or 2 years or 3 years, then you are not able to access any of the other UK registered gambling sites to put down a bet. Lots of gamblers have said that has been a game changer for them. But if you do want to get around it, there are plenty of websites out there that advise people on how you can do that. So it's far from foolproof. And it also doesn't cover the entire market. There are messenger-based gambling companies that aren't covered by GamStop.
When you went to the companies that run these apps, what did they say about how they operate, about the problem of gambling addiction, and what they see as their own responsibility, if anything, in all of this?
A spokeswoman for Flutter Entertainment, the parent company of Paddy Power, said the firm closed its VIP scheme and reduced the revenue coming from its highest spending customers by 55%. The Flutter spokeswoman said the firm had, quote, invested significantly, end quote, in its safer gambling capabilities in recent years. A spokesman for GamStop said it has always acknowledged that, quote, no system can ever be 100% infallible, end quote. The spokesman said that GamStop had helped 330,000 people to self-exclude since 2018. A gambling commission spokesman said that it would, quote, assess whether the industry's response to the challenge has delivered the right outcomes, end quote. In the last few years, the Gambling Commission has fined quite a lot of gambling companies quite a lot of money, millions of pounds, for various failings around not doing enough to detect gambling addicts and not doing enough in terms of AML checks and source of wealth checks.
What is AML?
Anti-money laundering.
Gavin, you're right that the UK is seeing suicides that are connected to gambling addictions.
Yeah, that's right. That was one of the most shocking things, I think, for us, was just the number of people who were killing themselves each year linked to their gambling addiction. So government statistics put it at around 409 suicides a year that can be directly linked to gambling addiction.
This is definitely a male-focused issue. By far the vast majority of problem gamblers and gambling suicides are younger men. I think that's probably one of the reasons why this has certainly become such a front-page issue in the UK, is that you have these awful stories of young men who've become addicted to these online casino games and lost vast amounts of money that they either don't have or that they've stolen to fund their gambling addictions.
So that raises the question, what, if anything, is the UK government trying to do to get hold of this and help people who are, gambling away all their money?
For the most part, successive UK governments have done very little to rein in the excesses of the gambling industry.
Why is that?
This massive booming in online gaming can all be traced back to the Gambling Act of 2005, which is the existing legislation that covers gambling. And, it's pre-smartphone legislation. At the time, it made us one of the most deregulated major gambling markets in the world. And so it couldn't really foresee this huge boom in online gaming. And the gambling companies have been making hay, taking advantage of that kind of lack of regulatory foresight ever since.
And why is that? Why wouldn't the government want to be doing something about this?
Well, there's a very close relationship historically between various UK governments and the gambling industry. The gambling industry spends a lot of money on hospitality, on UK politicians. There are several politicians who are paid to give speeches or provide advice for gambling companies. There are many sitting members of the House of Lords who have positions on the boards of gambling companies. And they have a very effective, aggressive lobbying arm to the industry that has managed to persuade successive governments to largely leave them alone.
When we come back, the UK's gambling craze heads for the US. Harry and Gavin, you've spoken about all the problems associated with gambling in the UK and the rise of these online sites and apps. In the US, we're also starting to see an increase in online gambling. I know that I'm just always surprised at how many advertisements there are for it on the radio that I come across online. It seems like more than ever before. Do you foresee a similar problems heading across the ocean toward the US?
Pretty much all the UK and European gambling companies are really falling over themselves to enter the US market because the European market has become so saturated. So as the majority of US states have liberalized their gambling laws in the last few years, there's already a market, I think, of more than 100 million people kind of waiting to be tapped in the US. And while at the minute, most of that's online gambling is limited to sports betting in states where it's legal. You do see these companies pitching online casino games to sports bettors by offering them these free spins. And that's a big worry for critics of the industry who argue that, these casino games are the really addictive ones. And so you will see the same problems that have happened in the UK happening in the US. And there's an important distinction, I think, between the US and the UK as well, because there isn't one regulator for the gambling industry in the US. There's lots of them. Each different state, I believe, I think oversight spread amongst like a patchwork of state and tribal governments, some of whom are, they've been described by colleagues of ours as captives of the industry who don't necessarily understand the new technology as well as they might.
Where are we seeing gambling really take off in the US right now?
I think one of the real gold rush states at the moment is New York. And certainly when we were talking to people, one of the places that's seen as, I guess, sort of the El Dorado currently for gambling companies, right, is New York. And despite state taxes being incredibly high on gambling revenues, you've got gambling companies literally queuing up to get one of these licenses because it's considered so lucrative a market. So I think what you've got are these incredibly well-funded, sophisticated companies that see these opportunities in a liberalizing market. And my guess is obviously the US will probably go down the same road as the UK if it's not careful.
Talking to Harry's point on the, New York, so the tax rate there is 51%, which obviously is incredibly high.
On gambling earnings?
Yeah, on gross gambling revenue, and yet gross gaming revenue rather. And yet, as Harry says, there's still this queue going out the door. So it just shows how profitable they see that business as being. Since January, gambling companies have signed up 1.5 million accounts from 1.1 million customers, almost 90% of them new to regulated sports betting. And just in that first month alone, in that January, $1.7 billion was wagered on sports games online in New York.
Kevin, in the U.S., the Supreme Court ruled in 2018 in a big case that opened the door for more of this sort of betting. Can you describe what happened?
Basically, it allowed online gambling or made online gambling legal on a state-by-state basis.
Breaking news: the Supreme Court this morning striking down the federal ban on sports betting. Now it leaves it up to the states.
And that really opened the door to a massive influx of gambling companies into the US. And in many of the states, now you are not only able to do sports betting online, but you can also do casino game betting online as well.
And so that led to a lot of states that before didn't do this, now seeing a great increase in the number of gamblers and gambling sites catering to them.
Yeah, there's been an explosion of gambling sites in the US and in the online gambling revenues.
And if you think about it, it's not so long ago that some of the executives of some UK-listed gambling companies were having to avoid going to the US because of cases there and the threat of arrest. So it's really quite a substantial turnaround in terms of the openness of the US to online gambling.
Gavin Finch and Harry Wilson, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You can read Gavin Finch's and Harry Wilson's online gambling story at Bloomberg.com. Thanks for listening to us here at The Big Take. It's a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Read today's story and subscribe to our daily newsletter at Bloomberg.com/BigTake. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us with questions or comments to bigtake@bloomberg.net. The supervising producer of The Big Take is Vicky Vergolina. Our senior producer is Catherine Fink. Our producer is Federica Romaniello. Our associate producer is Zenib Siddiqui, with additional production support from Rebecca Chasson and Sam Gabauer. Raphael Amsili is our engineer. Original music by Leo Sidran. I'm Wes Kosova. We'll be back tomorrow with another Big Take.